Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining me again for this lesson number 7. After this long time we continue our discussion on authorization, and today we start with the first part of method-based authorization for our security configurations. Happy to be back, and of course if you are here with me live, don't forget that you have the live chat and you can ask questions and start discussions. If you're watching the event recorded, as usual, you can use the comments section to ask your questions, and do follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn because we can discuss there as well in case you need that. With that being said, I will start with sharing my screen and the refresher on where we are and what we are going to discuss starting today, probably next time as well, because you will see this subject is I won't say a large one, but it's more than 1 hour what we need to discuss. So you will need, if we want to cover it properly, we will need more than just one lesson for it. So you do remember that we have the application, which I will draw it somewhere here on the right side on the screen. And first component of the web application, I'm going to be specific. I'm discussing about the web application, but then I'm going to be specific again and tell you that what I teach you starting today in terms of authorization doesn't only apply to web applications, because you will see method-based authorization because it's aspect-based and it's applied at the method level. It doesn't necessarily need to be in a web application anymore. Previously we discussed HTTP filter-based application, and then of course filters you only have in a web application. So what we discussed in terms of authorization until today was applicable only to web applications, but what we discuss today is applicable not only for web applications but for any kind of application. But of course I will still give you the examples using web application because it's easy and because it's more practical, because yes, we know Spring is not only about web-based applications, but let's be honest, in most cases you will see and you will use web-based applications. So that's why let's still think about the web application. So this is our dummy web app that we are discussing, and this is the controller, and you know pretty well probably if you followed also my Spring fundamentals that in your class design this leads to a service. The service can use proxies, repositories, and so on and so forth. So this is the application, and you also know that before the controller we have the filter chain. We use the filter chain. So here may be the authorization filter that we discussed and learned how to configure till now. Here somewhere is also what you learned to be called the security context. And then before that, you know, and this is what we actually started the first lesson with, is the authentication. And this is where the authentication object is added to the security context once the authentication is successful, so that the authorization filter can use it and decide whether to delegate to the controller or not. And then based on what happens, it can either go back with a 403 forbidden, or it can go to the controller and continue the execution. But that's something you already know. That's something we discussed in the previous 6 lessons. So let's stop focusing now on the filter chain and discuss the fact that you can apply security here, here, or here. You can actually apply authorization rules at any method level of any bean. So not only on the controller, for example, that's how we'll probably mostly show as an example, but in some cases you can define authorization rules at the service level, and why not? Maybe you can define them at the repository level as well, or at the proxy level. It's not very common to be as much to the right as the repository in the class design, and it's more common, and you will see why. And developers, a lot of developers like actually even to use the method level security on controller to replace what we've learned until now, and that is the ones that we could apply at the filter level here. But it's kind of a few differences you need to know, and of course we are going to discuss them. So this is where you can apply again authorization rules, and these authorization rules, they will continue using the data from the security context. So the data for the security context is still what the application needs to validate the rules that you define as being authorization rules. So that's why the first part that we have discussed, which is this one, the authentication. So this is the authentication. This is very important. This is the very important first step to any kind of authorization that applies further in the execution. So first is the authentication. The authentication ends up with some information here in the security context, and then this information from the security context is used both by filter level authorization, if you define the rules as we've learned using the HTTP server object, or as we will continue learning starting today, using global method security. So method level security that can be applied at any level of your application here, but it's still information from the security context. So I hope you got this. Once the authentication successfully ends, we have the information, then either the filter or the aspect that we will learn about today will apply the rules, and if the things go well, then the things go well, and if they don't, then the response will be back with a 403 forbidden, because we've also learned, and that's something I would like to remind you, that we usually consider 401 unauthorized to be the translation of unauthenticated, while 403 forbidden is the equivalent of understanding something failed at the authorization level. Okay, but of course that's already a lot of talk, and I hope you already know where we are now after this diagram. I will come back to it later if needed, but my suggestion as usually is let's start coding something and see how is that really applied. And then of course I do advise you take this example and use it yourself, because you will always find it on my GitHub account after every lesson. So how were we naming our projects? Is Spring Security 2022 C7 because today is lesson number 7, and then E1 because it's just the first example. Sometimes we will have more examples. I will continue using Java 17, which is the latest long-term supported, not the latest version, at least at this moment when I'm live now and discussing the subject. Java 19 appeared a couple of days ago, so I could have even think about using Java 19, but I won't, because it's irrelevant for our examples of Spring Security. And of course we are still looking forward to see Spring Boot 3 in action, but that will be later. So let me continue using the latest generally available Spring Boot version. So we design a web application, so let me add the web dependency, And of course, we discussed Spring Security, so I need to add a Spring Security dependency. And since I want to keep my examples as simple as possible and avoid overcomplicating the things, and take them step by step, so I make your life easier in understanding this stuff, I will just stick to these dependencies and I will avoid using now databases and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe mostly if you want, we can use Lombok to use the setter, getter, all args constructor and so on annotations instead of generating them, but that's the most of it for today. So let's keep it simple, such in a way in which you can focus easier on our discussion. And for some reason IntelliJ started on my second screen, but I just moved it here so you can see what I'm doing. And that's it. Let's wait for it to get completely indexed. Still waiting for it to do something right here, as you can see. I think it's already a while since I started my IntelliJ because I had a quite long vacation. And here it is syncing, fingers crossed to be working because I didn't test it before. And hopefully my computer is powerful enough to support the download of the indexes as well as the live streaming, because sometimes it happens that it fails and I don't want that to happen now. Still need to wait a bit. And it's going on a lot. Okay, something seems to happen, but I'm not sure if it's good or bad. Anyway, I will still have the chance to tell you what I want to tell you. So let me go here, and of course, firstly, what we need to be able to do is have something to, we want to secure something, so we need a resource. So let's just, for the moment, start by adding a controller and the demo endpoint that we consider the resource we want to secure. So how do we call it? Demo controller, because I don't have too much inspiration today. And okay, as I was expecting, my computer started to be already a little bit slow because of IntelliJ running some indexes there, but I hope this will go soon. So REST controller and public string demo endpoint that we want to secure, and get mapping and assigning it a path. So now we can call this whenever we want. And the second thing I'm going to do is defining the authentication configuration, because you know that we need to have a possibility to authenticate. Now going back to my diagram, again, you can't have any kind of authorization without having previously a way to authenticate. And yes, I know we started in the first lesson discussing that by default you have a user detail service and you have a randomly generated password for a user, but now we can, and we know already enough at this time, to create a custom user detail service, at least a dummy one, to remember that we need it. So we have a config package, and in the config package I'm going to create the security config class. I'm going to annotate it with configuration, and you know that we don't extend web security configure adapter anymore today. We will have to define a security filter chain and add it as a bean in the context http security http, and then we return HTTP. We use basic, and look what I'm going to do here. I will just say and authorize requests, any request authenticated. So in this case, what this implies is that I'm sure that when I reach the method level here, whichever the request would have been, it will go through the authentication step. So why is that important? Is because if I wouldn't use this and I would use, say, the permittal, and in case this doesn't look familiar to you, by the way, what I'm explaining now here very fast is because I already explained it in detail in the previous lesson. So if you are first time here with us, mind this is lesson number 7. So if you don't know some things, then what you need to do, what I advise you do, is go back and study them, because I already discussed them. If I'm going to use the permittal here and not the authenticated, then that means that in all the cases there could be situations where the request is not authenticated, and it would run my authorization here that I'm trying to explain today. And then if it's not authenticated, then there will be nothing here in the security context, and then the authorization will fail. So that's why even if we use the method level authorization, we still need to somehow configure the app to make sure that the requests are authenticated, because if we don't enforce this somehow, then there will be cases where there is nothing in the security context, and we don't want that, because it's like trying to apply authorization without having authentication. That's not possible. It's always authentication. The system finds out who you are, and then it's authorization. Of course, let's add this exception, and then let's make sure that we have also user details service for our demonstration. So I say user details service, user details is user with username John, password, okay, we need at least an authority, and we build it, and then we create an in-memory user details manager. We create the user. I think lately you could even actually use the constructor. Now it has a constructor, so I could have said here u1 and avoid calling the create user, but that's less relevant. We add the bin annotation above, and then we define the password encoder. And if I'm using bcrypt password encoder, if I'm doing something like this, that's fine. But then I really need to make sure that this 1 2 3 4 4 5 password is encoded properly. Otherwise, my authentication wouldn't work, isn't it? Because what the app expects here is that the stored password is an encrypted form of the plain text that I will send through Postman. So either use here, like we did, the no op password encoder if you want, but remember this is marked as deprecated because you can only use it in demonstrations. But if you want to use the bcrypt, then you can make sure that the stored password is already encrypted, like I did here, and that looks fine for me. Now you can see that the only thing I requested here through this filter is having the user authenticated no matter which the request is. If I'm going now to use method level authorization, what I will basically do is I will use some annotations like pre-authorize, and through pre-authorize in the value of the annotation I can define which are the authorization rules, and I can take the simplest possibly of the authorization rules, say has authority or has any authority, has authority or has any authority, and define the authority I would like my user to have. So authority for my user was read. Let's actually create a couple of users so we can play. So we have U1, U2, John, and Bill, read and write. And then UDS create user U2 as well. Okay, so now we have a couple of users. They have different different authorities. So now I can say this demo endpoint is only accessible if you have the authority read. I want you not to focus now on this parameter. Just get the main idea of what pre-authorize is, and then I will show you some more things that you can write here. So I will simply put more endpoints, and I will give you the most essential the way I consider the most essential expressions that you can use with pre-authorize. So first of all, I explain you how pre-authorize works, and then I explain you what you can put here in the parentheses. Although I think it's pretty easy here to read that it applies a condition on the authority of the authenticated user. So it says you can access this method only if the user that has authenticated has the authority read. So pretty simple. Now, any mechanism that has an aspect behind the scenes in Spring usually needs to be enabled, like transactionability, for example. Same is with pre and post authorization. If you want to use these annotations, then you have to make sure that you have used on at least one of the configuration classes the enable global method security annotation. And then the enable global method security annotation is applicable to 3 kinds of annotations. Out of these 3 kinds of annotations, we generally, in 99% of the cases, use the so-called pre-post annotations. And yes, you guessed correctly, pre-authorize is a pre-post annotation because it starts with pre or post. Pretty easy. Which are the other pre-post annotations? So you have pre-authorize, you have pre-filter. So let's say pre-authorize, post-authorize first, which we will take them in this order. So pre-authorize, post-authorize, and then we discuss filtering with pre-filter and post-filter. Okay, so these are the 4 pre-post annotations, and when you added this annotation global method security and you set the pre-post enable on true, then what you did here is you made sure that these annotations are now evaluated by an aspect behind the scenes. So you activated an aspect. If you don't know what an aspect is, my advice is, of course, go to the Spring Fundamentals playlist or read chapter 5 or 6. I don't remember exactly from my Spring Start here. I have it here. Okay, find this book, read chapter 5 or 6. Okay, I won't now look for it because we are live. And you will get what an aspect is. It's very important to understand aspects and IOC for anything Spring related, so do learn that first. Now, of course, what we discuss here, the pre-post annotations and all the other which are related to global method security, they are evaluated by an aspect behind the scenes. So what you did is you enabled that aspect and you made it understand the pre-post annotations. There are a couple more annotations that we can use. Is the secured annotation and this is the roles allowed one. Roles allowed. Okay. And if you want to use them, then secured enable true is for secured. Roles allowed is the JAssert 250, which is basically, yes, it sounds ugly, but it's basically the JSR which introduced the roles allowed and some other annotations, and these are basically made more to be compatible with the old Java EE specifications. So it's pretty. I'm pretty sure you will not often find the roles allowed or the secured annotations, but I will make some demonstration with secured and the roles allowed at the end in the next lessons, when we have already discussed all the other important ones. And again, the most important ones are the pre-authorized, post-authorized, pre-filter and post-filter, and that's how we enable them. So going back, what I did, now I know that this pre-authorized can be read and is known by my application. I applied the authorization rule through the value of the annotation, and now I know that if I'm calling this method with the user John, it will work because John has the authority read. But if I'm going to call it using Bill, it will not work because Bill doesn't have the expected authority. So that's how it works, and we can demonstrate. Hopefully my application will start, because I see some unresolved plugin here, but I have no idea why. And then I also need to start Postman, don't I? Or find a way to call the endpoint, maybe CURL, but I'm not into writing a lot of command lines today, so let's just start Postman and then take it the easy way. Okay, something still happens here. Go IntelliJ, start my application, compile it. Don't use all my memory for that. Okay, looks like it built it successfully, and we are waiting for it to start. And started in a lot of time from my point of view. We have also some Postman here, and the endpoint is demo, so demo, and then we can say basic authentication. Let's start with Bill. Bill 12345 should be a 4034 forbidden. 4034 forbidden, while John 12345 should be a 200 okay, and we can see the body demo of the endpoint. So that proves that what we expected about the pre-authorize is true. So remember that we have no other configuration here. We just made sure that anyone needs to authenticate, and then we applied the authorization rules directly on the method itself. Why do developers like to use it this way? Is because it's a bit cleaner if you have a larger service. So remember that today not everything is in microservices still. We don't even want that. Like monoliths are still okay, isn't it? So if you use a larger service or a monolithical application, then you have in one artifact all the endpoints, and if you have 100 endpoints, then you definitely don't want to have a lot of configurations on the filter level, because they are really ugly and hard to read. You can try that if you want. So you will find it more easy to apply the authorization directly on the endpoint itself. Easy from the reading point of view, and that's it from the maintainability point of view. So that's why, especially if you have a service with more than like 10 endpoints, it might become really uncomfortable to have everything here defined as I taught you how to implement in the previous lessons. Instead, you can simply apply here the rules related to being or not authenticated, and then directly on the endpoint show what is the expectation in terms of authorization, which is, as you will learn in these lessons, very easy to do using the pre-post annotations. Okay, so let me change this one and say this is demo 1, and then I will create more endpoints to show you multiple ways, multiple things that you can do in terms of authorization. So of course, you know that I could put here any kind of authority, so that if I writing that demo 1 is read and demo 2 is write, then we know that write would now be on the opposite, accessible by Bill and not accessible by John. Or you can say has any authority, and then you can just say 1, 2, and enumerate all the authorities you want to be applicable to this specific controller method. So if I'm having something like this, that makes demo 2 accessible for both Bill and John, and not accessible for any other user my app would have, which doesn't have one of these authorities. So the second thing you can do is do something like that. Let me restart and prove you now that demo 2 is accessible for both Bill and John. And then I will show you what happens if we have also a more complex authorization rule. What can you do in that case? Okay, app started, going back to Postman, demo 2, and I will prove that John gets a 200 OK and Bill gets also a 200 OK. And that's me going back. Some questions in the chat. Olga, thank you for the question. Which filters will work if they will contradict each other? Very good question, actually. Very good question, and a very important one. I'm going back to my diagram. Oops, it's no longer active. No longer active because it went to sleep. Okay, how can I make it active again? No, I can't make it active again. Oh no, oh no. Okay, this is it, finally. And if, you know, we have the filters here. So the filters, they are always before the controller. If I'm drawing a line now, okay, here, you know that what we write now is here in the controller. So this is where pre-authorize is. And all the other annotations that we will work, they start from, this is the furthest to the left point where you can start using them. But if you have filters like the ones we learned how to define here, okay, this here, they are more to the left because it's on the filter side. So all the filters, they are here. So in case you have contradiction between what you write in the authorization annotations and what you have on the filter will always apply first. Why? Because the request always goes through the filter first, and in case something is not good here, then it already gets rejected with a 403 forbidden, and it doesn't reach the controller at all. So the rule is, in a web application, always the priority is first on the filter, and if the request passes the authorization configuration on the filter, then it applies the authorization configuration on the beams, which starts from controller, but you will see that you can apply them to the next objects as well. So here we discuss only about requests that have already passed the authorizations at the filter levels. That's the order in which you get them. And yes, it's important because you can actually use both of them at the same time. That's not wrong. So you can have situations where you apply part of the configuration here and part of the configuration on the method, and you need to know in which order they will be evaluated, otherwise you won't understand the app's behavior. I hope I answered your question with that, Olga. Thank you very much again. And we have another question from George. Can you have some custom method in the pre-authorized? Excellent question. That was already something I wanted to show you. So give me a few more minutes to explain everything, and I will reach to having custom methods as well in the pre-authorized. But the answer is yes. So to give you something from the beginning, the answer is yes, you can do that. Cool. Before going into that, I would like to also tell